Hey everyone, Jim Fitzpatrick. Thanks so much for joining me on another edition of CBT Now, right here on the CBT Automotive Network. Today on CBT Now, we're joined by Brian Finkelmeyer, Senior Director of Enterprise Insights and Advisory at Cox Automotive, to discuss a recent article that he wrote for CoxAutomotive.com. Brian, thank you so much for spending some time with us. It's always great catching up with you. And politicians beat the auto industry like a pinata. It deserves better is the title of your latest post at Cox Automotive under their Insights section. So talk to me about this. What have you got to say? It seems like you're upset that politicians are coming down on the automotive industry once again.
Well, Jim, first of all, thanks so much for having me on. It's always good to be on CBT. And I think you and I, two of our favorite things to talk about are the car business and politics.
That's right.
So this should be an interesting conversation.
That's right.
But I think it's fair to say, as we have now kind of entered the first 100 days of the Trump administration, I don't think any of us in the auto industry expected to see such drastic shift in terms of the tariffs that have been enacted and all of the consequences that are associated with that. And, this comes on the heels of 4 years of the Biden administration, which had really pushed the auto industry in a completely different direction, really going after green initiatives and really pushing the automakers' hands with respect to adoption of electric vehicles and massive investments that were deployed against that. And so in my mind, it just feels like this whiplash that only a pinata could appreciate, of being banged one way and now being hit another way by the two, major political parties in this country.
That's right. That's right. And it does seem that way to many in the auto industry. And we were under these incredible demands from Biden with regard to EV solutions, or an EV environment by 2035, totally unrealistic. OEMs, dealers, everybody, vendors all agreed this will not happen. And then of course to hear later on that his incredible multi-billion-dollar investment or commitment, I should say, to EV charging stations really never came to fruition. I think they built like 3 or 4 or something, and so it was it left everybody hanging like, wow, you come out swinging, thinking that everybody's thinking that the Biden administration is going to support this effort, when in reality they kind of pulled out the carpet from under anybody, right?
Well, yeah, and I think the Inflation Reduction Act was obviously a big piece of the legislation to really push the hand of the automakers with both carrots and sticks. And, that's a funny anecdote you call out, that they had secured $7.5 billion to develop a network of infrastructure of charging centers. And I think the Washington Post reported that they'd actually built 7 of them. So you're a little light on the 3 to 4. But nonetheless, give
7.
credit where credit is due. They got 7 done over the course of the 4 years.
Right.
But anyway, no, I think, that to your point you made earlier was just certainly unrealistic expectations, and then just this really intense game of carrots and sticks. So that the automakers didn't achieve these EPA standards that had been really elevated. Today, the average fuel economy across all vehicles about 27 miles per gallon. Biden administration wants us to be at, I believe, 40 miles per gallon by like next year, and then it goes to like 52 miles per gallon as we get into 2030. So these very unrealistic objectives, and then the result of that is that companies like Tesla that produce all electric cars are able to sell off these emissions credits, and companies that, the mainstay of American auto industry is big trucks and big SUVs, take their profits that they make selling their big trucks and SUVs and turn those over to Tesla. So last year, Tesla reported about $12 billion of net income. $3 billion of that was basically just wealth transfer, largely from domestic automakers buying emissions credits.
Yeah, exactly. And so here comes Donald Trump with all kinds of tariffs now. And, everybody said, or not everybody, but a lot of the dealers that I talk to now across the country are saying, well, that's what he told us he was going to do. That's why we put this man in office, was to roll up his shirt sleeves and do what he needs to do in order to fight fentanyl, we're told now, and in order to take care of the border and all of these other things. And then, of course, level the playing field with these other countries with regard to tariffs. So he comes in swinging, and the auto industry is now in flux to say, what's going on here? Is Trump a friend or a foe to the auto industry, and we're not. It seems like we're not really sure yet.
Well, yeah, and I think one of the biggest challenges, right, that faces the car companies is the inconsistency of government
Yeah,
policy, right? So
yeah,
at a high level, you can say, well, first we had the EV push, and now we've got this big domestic manufacturing push.
yeah.
But even last night, the Trump administration made more adjustments to this tariff policy, and I've heard stories that companies like Range Rover have just stopped shipment of vehicles. You
That's
think
right.
$100,000 Range Rover, you're looking at a $25,000 tariff,
Yeah.
that they paused shipments. And I think we're beginning to see that type of behavior. And so at Cox Automotive, we track this stuff very closely.
Hmm.
And to date, we have not really seen any material moves in terms of, boy, we can see that new vehicles being listed are showing up with a higher MSRP. It feels to me like the auto industry is in a bit of wait and see stance right now,
Yeah.
because it's a constantly moving target with Trump and his policies. And so I guess one last comment I would make, and I'll probably mess up the comment, but there's a famous saying about Trump, not to take him literally, but to take him seriously. And it feels like that's exactly about where we're at right now.
Yeah, yeah. The uncertainty is waning on everyone. Obviously, his approval ratings are showing that as well. It's got record low approval ratings for recent presidents of at this point in time. So that I think adds to the uncertainty as well. It will be interesting to see how he works things out with China. If you ask him, they're working things out. If you ask China, they haven't even come to the table yet or had these discussions.
Yeah.
So all of this has got, obviously the auto industry, whether it be on the wholesale side or the retail side, wondering what is our next move? What are the dealers' next moves, in a situation like this, right?
Well, yeah, I think, for the local car dealers, this is going to be a very interesting moment. And we're already seeing changes in the used car market. Manheim,
Yeah.
we're seeing used car values go up.
Yep.
And this kind of comes at a moment where, 3 years ago during the microchip shortage, and we weren't leasing many cars. I think the lease penetration in America had come down to maybe 9-10%.
Yeah.
And so now we're 3 years after that, and we're in the
Yep.
trough of this valley of less lease vehicles coming back, the very tightest used car market that we've seen in quite a long time. And this is now where dealers are beginning to think, boy, maybe I need to shift my focus towards the used car game, because the new car game is going to become a lot more complicated as we think about this tariff implications. And I guess the one thing that I would say that I feel sort of empathetic towards is, certain brands that rely more upon production coming out of Mexico or Canada. You could have a circumstance where there's Volkswagen dealers on one side of the street where 80% of his inventory is subject to tariff. Meanwhile, the Honda dealer across the street maybe has a much lower percentage. So I think there's just so many layers of complexity of this. It's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out.
That's right. That's right. We sound probably to a lot of dealers right now very doom and gloom. This conversation that you and I are having, right? Like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. The sky is falling. What are we going to do? But the industry and dealers are resilient. I know that that's a very overused term, but they are at the end of the day. And we've gotten through a lot of other things that everybody thought, oh, this could be the end of us. Bernie Moreno, when we interviewed him in New York a couple of weeks ago, said that at the end of the day, this will be a blip on the radar, and I'm paraphrasing, and in a year from now, we won't even be talking about this. Do you think that is a possibility?
Well, let's certainly hope he's right. I think as we sit here today, this looks like a pretty big deal affecting our industry. But I think the other point you made, Jim, is so true. You think about, back in 2008-09, we had the gas prices were up to $5-6 a gallon, and we had the economic crisis. I remember I was in Atlanta that time, and sales just dropped off a cliff when we hit the recession. And then you think about the pandemic, the microchip shortage, and I've always been so impressed by car dealers and the industry's ability to persevere through headwinds and unforeseen challenges. And I would say that I have a high degree of confidence that we'll figure this one out as well. And I think one thing that certainly bodes well for car dealers is just their entrepreneurial nature and their ability to shift their game. So if you're going to make the new car game tougher, I can lean in on on my parts and service
That's
business,
right.
or I can lean on my used car business, or I have flexibility to how I can be successful. And I guess, you think back during the pandemic and the microchip shortage, on paper, it's like, boy, this is going to be a nightmare. It turned out to be the golden era for the car business. So who
That's
knows?
right.
Let's see how this all plays out.
That's right. And through COVID, we learned, I think dealers, I say we, but the dealer body learned a lot about their own operations. They learned about redundancies. They learned about where they were paying way too much in terms of either headcount or overall expenses, whether it be in the marketing side or other areas. And they said, whoa, this has been obviously a great exercise, more than an exercise, but it's been a great opportunity for us to really hone in on our dealership operation from a standpoint of savings. And I think they've taken a lot of those best practices into the times that the cash was coming over the bow, so to speak, during 2022, 2023, when they could do no wrong. They sold every car for sticker price plus. And but I think they came out of that error with a whole new view of their operation, right?
Absolutely. And I think, one of the things we're facing today in the car business, the big drivers of the expense that we've seen is obviously the floor plan cost has gone higher. And so now, I think some of the analysts are forecasting that this tariff thing could potentially take 2 million units out of play,
right,
as we draw down volume. So maybe that's some benefit to dealers, that their floor plan cost comes down. Obviously, people costs have been on the rise.
Oh yeah.
The cost of doing business is higher.
That's
and
right.
Then I think the other big driver is obviously marketing expense. And obviously
Right.
that's a never-ending battle of dealers trying to figure out, how do I get the most bang for my buck on that side of my business. But I think clearly it's going to be on that expense side of the equation where we're going to have to be very, very focused. And then it remains to be seen, how things unfold on the revenue and the sales side. And I think that at the end of the day, the car companies are going to be highly incentivized to keep these factories moving. And they certainly need, cash flow is their oxygen, and they are going to do what it takes, whether that be incentives, whether that be eating some of this tariff, employee pricing. We've seen already early actions that automakers are taking to keep the engine humming.
Yeah, no question about it. And now, it's funny because that this didn't make bigger news, but now we've got auto manufacturers in China that are saying, hey, we've got a charging situation or a new charge that takes 5 minutes. 5 minutes or less to charge a battery and on a vehicle. And I think this kind of went. I don't think it got the headlines that it deserved, because that is a huge new breakthrough, right?
Absolutely, Jim. And that's BYD, Build Your Dreams, over there in China. And I mean, it is just absolutely incredible what the Chinese have done in terms of the last really 5 years of their EV and car business has just exploded. And
that's right.
Just to kind of put this into perspective, I believe the Chinese fleet of these carrier ships that they'll ship 8,000 units at a time, they have about 35 ships in their fleet. They've got orders for like another 70.
Wow.
So their ambition to export vehicles is very, very high. And I think that this is one of the other challenges that car companies face, is that, yes, we have huge tariffs on electric vehicles produced in China. I think it's 200% here in the United States. So I don't think we're going to see any BYDs on the street anytime soon. But that doesn't mean that General Motors and Ford and Toyota and Honda and these companies that compete in countries like Indonesia or Thailand or all across the world aren't feeling the massive impact of these new Chinese automakers that have got massive cost advantages against us. And I think, to your point, not just on the charging piece, but I'm reading even on the autonomous piece that they're trudging ahead. So I think that the Chinese have clearly made the auto industry one of their big focuses for their own domestic production, and that is posing a big challenge on the industry at large.
Yeah, no question about it. Brian Finkelmeyer, Senior Director of Enterprise Insights and Advisory at Cox Automotive. Thank you so much for stopping by. We've got so many more questions to ask you on this topic, but time doesn't allow. So I'd love to do a follow-up with you to jump back on here.
I'm sure in a couple of weeks, Jim, the world will change again, and we'll have much more to talk about. So thanks so much for having me on. Maybe by the end of this conversation we're having, it changes, right? Exactly. It's incredible. Well, thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.